to stay right here and hang on for dear life. Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. Amen. Our elder daughter is a librarian, and one of the things she oftentimes does is she gives us books as gifts for holidays. And she gave me this book entitled Taste and See, but the subtitle is what caught me. Discovering God among butchers, bakers, and fresh food makers. Those of you who know me, you can understand why that caught my eye. Margaret Feinberg talks about the importance and the commonality of eating in the scriptures. In my concordance, there are no less than 28 references to bread, excuse me, and 58 references to eating. The first mention of bread is in the Garden of Eden. In Hebrew, excuse me, the word for bread is lahem, which is synonymous for food. When God says to Adam, by the sweat of your brow you will eat your bread, sometimes that's translated, you will have food to eat by the work of your hand. When you think about bread, I'm sure many of you can conjure up whether you like rye or whole wheat or pumpernickel or white or Texas toast. In the United States, we have quite a variety. It can be made from different flours. It can have different nuts. It can have beans. It can have all kinds of products ground to make into flour. And we have a tendency in this country to add other things like fruits, vegetables, herbs, oils, etc. into the mix. In ancient times, they were much more limited to what they had to add into their bread. And they had to protect their crop. They had to, number one, make sure they had enough to serve the entire household for the entire year, to make sure that it didn't spoil, and they had to retain enough grain so that they could plant the next spring. Here in the United States, we can go into any store we want, pick up almost an unlimited variety and an almost unlimited quantity. If you choose to make your own, the ingredients are easily available. Not so in the history of the world. Mrs. Feinberg states, throughout history, there were wars fought and empires overthrown over the lack of access to bread. The French Revolution, and more recently, the Arab Spring. In Deuteronomy 8, God is reminding the Israelites that he brought his people out of Egypt, and the feast of the Passover is celebrated with unleavened bread as one of the components. The recipe Mrs. Feinberg gives is 2 ingredients, flour and water. That's not my idea of bread. The other thing she emphasizes in her book is that it has to be made quickly. I'm a visual type of teacher. I made a loaf of her bread yesterday. Flour and water, no leavening, and no time to let it leaven. It's sort of like a pita bread or a soft cracker. She says it should take 18 minutes from start to finish. Why 18 minutes? I don't know. It took me about 24, 25. And I had a 425 degree oven. But the emphasis is the fact that making unleavened bread had to be done quickly because they were escaping. They were leaving without advanced planning. Proofing was not an option. And today, the variety of breads we have, it has to be light and fluffy. And I grew up with homemade bread. My mother made an oatmeal bread that was heavenly. Most bread in ancient times had natural leaven. They had a form of yeast, not the same yeast we have today. But they had time, so they would let it proof. Today's yeast is a real time saver, and we really have learned to like it. Sourdough types were probably a little more common back then. If you make a batch of dough without the yeast, you will get some natural leavening. It just will take a long, long time. To this day, much of the Earth's population derives its majority of calories from grains. Only the wealthiest people in the richest parts of the world can afford to not eat bread. If you didn't take anything else home today, take this home. If bread were eliminated from our collective diets worldwide, 2 billion people would starve to death within a month. Think about that for a moment. 1/4 of the world's population would starve in 1 month if they didn't have bread. Now, where does the term breaking of bread come from? There's no mention of bread knives in the Bible. Please note the pattern of these 3 stories. In Matthew 14, 19, and 20, the story of the feeding of the 5,000, quote, "And he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking to heaven, he gave thanks, broke the bread, and gave them to his disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over." It didn't say crumbs, it said broken pieces. Matthew 26, 26, the story of the Last Supper. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, and gave it to his disciples. In Luke 24, verse 30, on the road to Emmaus, when he was at table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Do we give thanks when we break bread? In her research, Mrs. Feinberg visited an archaeologist studying the Pompeii ruins. There, he had recovered in the ovens intact loaves of bread from AD 79, which isn't that far after the life of Christ. She said, "What catches my attention are the cuts on the bread's surface, which allowed the loaves to be eaten and broken easily." Another show and tell. I spent yesterday baking. There are cuts in here, and it makes it easy to break. There was a reason behind it. Have you ever been to an ethnic restaurant? When our Beth lived in Detroit, she took us to an Ethiopian restaurant, and we sat at a table, and the bread, I think it's called naan, the bread was the utensil to bring the food to your mouth. Other groups do the same. Tortillas, tacos, pitas. Bread is used as part of the eating process, not just the food. The communal nature of eating, as expressed in scriptures, it bears a strong contrast to 2025. God doesn't mean for us to eat alone, but with others, breaking bread and sharing. Maybe that's why potluck dinners are so popular in the churches. Mrs. Feinberg says, communal nature stands in stark contrast to how many of us are living today. Often when we encounter bread today, it is a solo affair. We select a plastic-wrapped loaf of perfectly shaped bread. We run to the self-checkout, or even worse, we place an order online that arrives at our door, so we have no interaction. And too often we eat in our cars or in our cubicles, and more often we eat and produce our food alone. Mrs. Feinberg says, sometimes we must shake ourselves free from a world with lab-designed food and free-willing individualistic spirituality and remember, from the field to the seed, to the growth, to the harvest, to the grinding, to the baking and serving, the bread we eat was intended to be a communal act with God, with us, and each other. And then she goes on to give a good analogy before the Exodus and after the Exodus. Before the Exodus, the people of God had experienced slavery and hoarding of what they had to eat. In the wilderness, God dispenses bread. In Egypt, the Israelites endured hard labor. In the wilderness, they gather manna with ease. In Egypt, Pharaoh lords over the Israelites for his own gain. In the wilderness, the Lord provides for his people. In Egypt, bread symbolizes human power. In the wilderness, bread symbolizes God's divine power. Finally, from the beginning, bread was shared around a table of working together, a table of vulnerability, a table of sacrifice, and a table of thanksgiving. God set his table for the Israelites so that they would remember their deliverance. Christ sets his table for his disciples in the upper room so that we can remember his sacrifice. Will you pray with me? Lord, remind us that each time we break bread with our families or our friends or with you as our table guest, let us give thanks for the abundance you